1970s, the government of Japan gave the museum its very first climate control system, just sort of an early prototype of a climate control system that we might have today, but it was the first one. It was the only wing in the museum that was climate controlled for a long time. So that's pretty important, that the Japanese government felt that it was a good idea for them to do that, because it sort of helped create a partnership between the government of Japan and the museum, and helped demonstrate that although many of these objects are, incredible objects, MFA has the best collection of Japanese art outside of Japan, and that were some of the objects still in Japan, they maybe would be national treasures that would be allowed to leave Japan. But the fact that we have them, we've sort of been given the okay by the Japanese government, that they sort of understand that we are trying to respect them as best we can, and that we are consulting with Japanese experts when appropriate, and that they trust us to take care of these objects. So that's a really wonderful thing to be able to know about the situation with this department. The issue with having the oldest climate control system in the building is now it's very outdated. So there's been a lot of funding and a lot of work starting to happen to update the system, which is excellent. So that's sort of part of what's taking place in there right now. There's some renovations happening, which includes some improvements to the climate control, which will also help the preservation of the objects, because they are all made from wood, and they all have lacquer and other materials on them. So as the relative humidity rises and falls, that causes cracks to open and paint to flake off, and so it's possible that the sort of outdated nature of the climate control system in the temple gallery sort of could have contributed to some of the conditions that we were seeing on the objects. So the fact that we were updating it is great for the temple room, great for the museum in general, and certainly great for the objects that will be within. I definitely think that the base of the gold dainichi, the one that I said was built in the 20th century, the early 20th century, the fact that some of the elements of it are in such poor condition, I think we can pretty clearly relate to environmental control issues. Specifically on this piece, it's covered in this lacquer material, which is very rigid. And so then as the wood sort of expands and contracts with changes in relative humidity, the lacquer sort of cracks off. So that's probably how that ended up in that condition. And it's very possible that on some of the objects, the same thing was happening. There was a lot of flaking polychromy on a number of the objects. And the gold dainichi was treated in the 1980s, so that wasn't treated even that long ago. And when I treated it, I still found areas of gilding that were coming loose. So that suggests to me that there was sort of continuing fluctuations in relative humidity, which is the major thing we're trying to avoid with wooden objects. That and insect infestations, which we don't think we have issues with here. During the installation, there was potentially a sighting of a bug. But,
a single bug?
Yeah, a single bug. Everyone panicked. And it was nearest to that object that he was working on. So that one, I'm sure she told you, we did an anoxia treatment on, just in case there was any bugs in there. But all of the objects have evidence of insect infestations, of historic insect infestations, because they lived in temples in Japan for 1,000 years.
This area, so this similar to like that's an area that's like in painted. So that's like the level of integration that we're going for. You can see kind of other areas that I have to go back. I have to do many layers to get that. So this area will be the first layer, so it won't be matching exactly, but come back in a few days and we'll filter up. About watercolor, as it dries, it changes. So it's not like you're inpainting exactly, you have to wait to see how it actually dries out.
So it's sort of a waiting process.
Yeah, you have to go back many times to get like that level of finish. You'll see areas that I've like done that are like halfway done, which has like base colors but haven't like had like a final finish on it. And there is no such thing as a simple black.
we're applying some mineral spirits to the area that we're going to work on. And the purpose of that is that the mineral spirits don't really affect the paint layer at all, and so it'll sort of saturate the top surface, so that as we put some other sort of adhesives and we want them to sort of go under the paint layer, they won't be able to come up to the surface as readily because the pores of that material are already full of the mineral spirits. So it's sort of trying to help prevent any staining that might occur. So then the adhesive we're using is called isinglass. It's a fish glue. It's made from the refined air bladder of the sturgeon fish. You might have talked about this already. Just regular museum visitors who are Buddhist, a lot of times go to that space. There's not a lot of Buddhist temples around, at least I'm not aware of. And this is just a particularly lovely space with, these ancient works. So we did, once we first closed the space down, we did have a lot of museum visitors coming up to us and saying, but I worship there, is there a way I could go in? We'd have to say, I'm really sorry you can't, but we're gonna reopen soon, it's gonna be better than ever. So there are definitely people who use the space as a religious space, which is interesting for us because we're thinking about them as art, as historical objects in a museum context. We don't necessarily treat them the way that they would be were they objects in a temple. As I mentioned before, we're not regilding, we're not repainting, we're not replacing broken elements, so it's sort of this weird dichotomy of sort of being respectful of the fact that these are, for many people, active religious objects, while also sort of understanding what our place is in their lives, that it's not our place to be doing this restoration work to make them look new or make them look brighter, that's not our place.